Okay, welcome everyone to FTC's November General Body Meeting. We are very excited to have a guest speaker with us. So Dr. Singer will be presenting Finding Your Fit in Tech Comm. And yes, I'll introduce her in a moment. So we have just a couple of announcements and then we'll get into the presentation with Dr. Singer. As far as announcements for our November GBM, we are in the process of scheduling that, but it's shaping up to be a really good one. So look out for more information soon about that. As well as a November social. We'll be having a Friendsgiving at Lake Claire. So the date and details with that will also be coming out soon. As far as STC, the Society for Technical Communication, the professional organization, SCC Florida will have their monthly networking social November 13th at 7:30 p.m. on Zoom. It's free for everyone to join, so that is a good opportunity to talk with different professionals from the industry. So that's our announcements. Before I hand it off to Dr. Singer, I'll introduce her. So she is an assistant professor at UCF. She teaches courses in technical communication. She's interested in the intersection of medical rhetoric, feminist science studies, the health, medical humanities, and digital media. Her work has appeared in Technical Communication Quarterly, College English PTO, Journal of Medical Humanities, and she is currently finishing a book. So thank you again, hopefully. So thank you again, Dr. Singer, for coming out tonight to speak to us, and I will let you share your presentation and take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so appreciative. I want to apologize in advance. I'm getting over a respiratory infection, and so you may hear me cough a little bit. I'm going to, of course, try to keep that to a minimum. Um, can those of you who have your cameras on give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Wonderful. Oh my gosh, well, I'm so pleased to be here. It's great to get to chat with all of you. Today, my presentation is called Finding Your Fit in Technical Communication. And one of the things that inspired this presentation was talking to students in the professional development course for undergraduates. I think it's called What to Do with Your English Major. And they said to me, things like, it really doesn't align with my values to work for a big technology company. But what else do I do as a technical communicator? And so my goal is to help you find your home, hence the house on this presentation, in technical communication and to see sort of what the options are and to make some decisions. It's not that your decision has to be permanent. We're just talking about as you look toward finding your current, your next position, or maybe the position after. This is maybe where you're trying to kind of be guided. And so I'm excited to talk with you about those possibilities today. I invite you to jump in at any time. I will at different points ask if people have questions and offer to be interactive, but I realize that sometimes when we join Zoom presentations, we're doing so in a passive way. So there's no pressure to do so. There's no pressure to turn your camera on, etc. So I'll be going through sort of 4 sections. The first is about self-evaluation and thinking about sort of what works for you, what do you like about technical communication, and what are you really good at? Then we're going to review some things about both job titles and job sectors. And I think that some of these things may surprise you. Ultimately, being a technical communicator does not necessarily mean that your title at work is technical communication. So I'm looking forward to talking you through that. And then ultimately, we'll end with this idea of finding your quote unquote Goldilocks plan. Now, the Goldilocks plan comes from several authors who work on remote work issues. And a Goldilocks plan to them is basically what's the balance of independent work, collaborative work, face to face versus asynchronous, online, or remote work. what really works for you. So our goal is to work through this very tangible issue, to think about your personal preferences as we go. So let's get started. We're first thinking about who you are, what your identity is as a technical communicator. So I'd like people to start by kind of asking themselves the following question. For the purposes of the presentation, I will read the questions first, and then I'll be interested to see if anyone wants to share, and I'll go first as an example. So these questions I developed to try to help you think about what you're really good at in the field of technical communication and what you really like. Because in my experience, sometimes we're good at things, but we don't necessarily like to do them. So I can give you just a brief example. Often, for reasons unknown to me, in both my personal and professional life, I am asked to plan events. I planned my grandmother's 80th birthday party a few years ago. I'm planning my grandfather's 90th birthday party. I've certainly organized different trainings and events at work, but I can't stand it. It makes me so stressed out to plan events. There's just so many pieces to coordinate, so many people to try to make them happy. And I find that very stressful. So even though for some reason I continue to end up in this role personally and professionally, that's not the direction I would go in if I was looking for a new position in technical communication. So, with that in mind, here's the first question. Which genres do you enjoy writing or creating, particularly in the field of technical communication? So, do you like doing document design? Do you like writing reports? Are you interested in the academic essay? What are the things that you like the most? And of course, this includes things like user or usability testing, and the other kinds of active engagement that we have in our classes. Relatedly, which types of work do you like the most? Do you enjoy working independently in an asynchronous environment? Or do you like a team environment? And when it comes to a team environment, do you prefer to be face to face some of the time, part of the time? Do you like to use Zoom and other video conferencing technologies? What works for you? Three, which UCF technical communication classes did you like best? Now, sometimes we really like a class because we have an amazing professor. We have amazing faculty here at UCF. So it's possible you just really loved that class with Dr. Applin. And so whatever it was, it didn't matter the subject, you were very excited about it. However, sometimes the specific content of a class is really exciting to a person. I'm currently teaching ENC 4219, technical communication and plain language. And I have a lot of students who have very deep and personal interest in plain language and literacy. So this is a great way to kind of think about, well, these are the classes that I like the best. These are the projects that I'm proudest of. So this can help lead me to the next step. Fourth, how would you like to upskill? This is kind of a corporate term, basically just meaning how would you like to further your training and education in the future? Now, sometimes this is through corporate training. So if you go to work for industry, which we'll talk about in a little bit, you may be required, in fact, to learn computer coding. You might be required to do institutional review board or human subjects research training. But we're also thinking about things that you want to learn. Where is it that you see yourself? Do you really want to master Adobe InDesign because you've gotten so good at Canva already? So these are some questions to ask yourself. And of course, where are your natural talents and gifts? Again, turns out other people think that I'm an event planner, but that is not my personal preference. And this is a great opportunity to talk with your friends and family, your professors, your colleagues, to think about where others have identified the most growth in you. Now, sometimes this is about the class or the area in which you struggled the most. You worked on a really difficult collaborative project in ENC 4293, for example, and that really helped you grow your teamwork skills and it kind of inspired you. You want to pursue that path further, even though it's not easy for you. So let's take a minute in the chat. If you are willing, or if you're willing to unmute, can you tell me one of the answer to one of these questions? So maybe it's a type of writing you really like to do, or maybe it's the class that you like the best, or maybe it's where you see your gifts in technical communication. I'll give everyone a minute to see if they're able to participate.
Yeah, I definitely, I've honestly liked most of the technical communication classes I've taken. I really liked writing for the computer industry. I like the types of writing that we did. I like writing procedurals and FAQs the most, although I know whether FAQs are the best tech comm choice is kind of a I've seen it can be a contentious issue, but I like writing them. So.
That's fantastic. And identifying that now can really help shape your current and future opportunities. Would anyone else be interested in sharing? Are there certain skills that you feel really strong, that you've really cultivated over the years? Are there types of writing you're really enjoying?
I can see
Well,
there's an answer in the chat.
oh, wonderful. Thank you for bringing that up. I mostly write creatively, but I would like to use the skill set learned in my English classes in a more serious or corporate environment. Well, we're going to talk a little bit perhaps about how that can work today. And I think creativity is kind of a skill you can't really teach, actually. So even if you don't feel that you're doing sort of official creative writing in the workplace, it doesn't mean that you can't be creative. And in fact, being innovative, being a problem solver, being someone with big ideas, that's who gets promoted. And so I want to encourage you to think, through whatever means to practice your creativity and to continue to cultivate that. As you're thinking about these questions, I'd like you to think about some additional questions, which are really kind of challenges, perhaps. As you're looking for a full-time permanent job, especially after you finish your time at UCF, you might be thinking about things like this. Are you location bound? At UCF, we're fortunate enough to have students from all over the state of Florida, all over the United States, and sometimes even internationally. And so, are you focused on getting a job in your current community, or are you planning to move elsewhere? And with that, are you hoping for a face-to-face option? Are you hoping for a hybrid option? What do you think would be really good for you? And there's a critical question here. How long can you wait after graduation to try to get one of these full-time jobs? And the reason that I'm posing that as a question is because if you go to work for the federal government, or perhaps for a government contractor, it can take months for the application process. Oh, I see that I froze there. Let's head back to the other page. Chantal, on my back.
You're back. We heard audio all throughout that. Only your visual stopped for a moment.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So especially with things like government contracting organizations, it could take months for them to simply process your paperwork, especially if you need to go through the security clearance process. So how long do you have? We also need to think about health insurance. We can't write when we're often not at our peak. As someone who has some chronic health issues, who often writes when she's not feeling very well, it's very important for me to maintain health insurance whenever possible. I like to remind people that health insurance isn't necessarily just for primary care and preventative visits, although it's very good for that. It's really important in case you're in, goodness gracious, a catastrophic accident that you owe only $20,000 to the hospital and not $120,000 to the hospital. So this is no small matter. Medical debt can kind of ruin people's lives. And so I see this as a really crucial aspect to talk about because it's usually related to employment in the United States. Certainly, you can pursue healthcare through the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, which is also sometimes still called Obamacare. And so that's health insurance that is not connected to an employer. However, sometimes it works really well for some people and there are great plans. Other people, for some reason, it's more expensive or the doctors aren't as accessible and it doesn't work very well. So is it crucial that you tie your health insurance to a job? And then, of course, do you plan to go to graduate school? Are you trying to upskill, as we were just talking about, as a means of preparing yourself for law school, for a PhD program, perhaps for even medical school or for any other kind of graduate work? So I don't want to ask everyone to sort of share their personal challenges, but just think to yourself, what are some of the challenges that you're facing, perhaps constraints, as you navigate the job market? And so with that, it's a great opportunity to talk about what you're actually going to see on the job market. I often have students who come to me and say, I'm looking for a job, but all of the positions that are called technical communicator really don't appeal to me. I never imagined myself doing government contracting work. I never imagined myself writing engineering manuals. I know there's other things to do, but what? So, what you need to think about is that technical communicators have many different titles. So in your job search, you really want to be using these different role titles so you can find other positions. Because what you'll find is that a content creator position often, of course, is involved in technical communication, but that's different than the technical communication done by a grant writer. And so, as we're talking about finding our fit, looking through this list, I'd like you to think about some of the positions that sound really appealing to you. One position you might not have kind of thought about before is teacher. Teachers, of course, communicate technical information to students. And we're going to talk a little bit about why becoming a teacher, at least for several years, could be an excellent opportunity for you. But I think for a lot of students, they're searching for just technical communicator. And what happens is they don't see the positions in instructional design. They don't see the positions in product engineering. They don't see positions in document development or content creation, medical writing. So as you're skimming this list, maybe you can shout it out or put it in the chat. Do any of these positions sound interesting to you? And as you're taking a brief look at that, I will take a brief look at the chat.
For me, I'm definitely interested in just what we think of when we think of technical writer. But from this list, instructional design sounds interesting to me. When I first came to college, my goal was to become a teacher, and that's not my primary goal right now. But I'm definitely interested in kind of curriculum and how to build things so that people can learn best.
I think that's fantastic. And this is one of the wonderful things about college is we often come with certain ideas in mind, or as the saying goes, we like to begin with the end in mind. But then as we're going along, we get all these new ideas. And it's really exciting to try to sort of mesh our old ideas and our new ideas. I think what's really challenging is this is kind of an overwhelming list. And this is actually an abbreviated version of a different list that I've put together. And I've linked it in this presentation so you can take a look at it anytime. I certainly don't expect that you would memorize such a long list of role titles. But I do want you to think about that technical communicators, the field is very large. And so you are not boxed into just one area. Certainly when you start in an area, sometimes because we begin as we mean to go on, sometimes that means we will continue there because we kind of have natural progressions, we get promoted, we upskill in that area. But it doesn't mean that you couldn't take a pivot and try to pursue another area. So there's really a lot of opportunities here. You just may not find them all if you're only searching on Indeed or another job hunting website for the term technical writer. So we're moving into now talking about the different sectors that these jobs belong in. By sector, I mean the area of work. I think this is new information for a lot of people. And so I'm going to go through in kind of deep detail. Certainly if you know something about one of the areas that I address, I invite you to chime in, especially perhaps you're working in one of these areas. It's always exciting to hear about someone's personal experience. But knowing that there are so many different roles, you can perform those roles in many different types of organizations. So the first one I'm going to address is government. And I want to emphasize that this includes local government, regional government, state government, and even federal government. And I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. I grew up in Maryland. So working for the government makes a lot of sense to me. I know a lot of people from home who do that. But when I talk to students in Florida about it, they often say, well, I don't want to move to Washington, D.C. And I want to emphasize that it's really important to realize that they have federal government positions all over the country. I'm seeing a note in the chat here. Could we go back? Sure. Can you tell me where you'd like us to go back to? The section with the job titles. Sure, absolutely. let's go back here rather than forward. Yes, so I realize this is an overwhelming list, and certainly the goal is just to expose you to these different types of jobs. And to think about sort of the things that you might like to do, because ultimately our goal is to create a Venn diagram, kind of like the ones maybe you've used in a presentation. We want this overlap between things that we're good at, things that will get us employed, and things that we like to do. Because again, just because we're good at something doesn't mean that we like to do it. And so, as you're looking at this list, as you're thinking about what you like to do and what you're good at, I invite you to think about sort of all of the different opportunities. And certainly, and again, I don't expect that anyone memorizes this list or anything like that. This is just an exposure opportunity to learn about sort of what might be available to you. So returning to government, working for the local, federal, regional, or state government can be a wonderful thing. So again, I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. And so I grew up kind of thinking that all government jobs were in the D.C. area. That is actually not true. Most federal jobs are not necessarily located in Washington, D.C. And so you don't necessarily have to live there in order to work one of them. However, sometimes they are revolving around like state capitals and that sort of thing, regional capitals. And so they're not exactly everywhere, but they're certainly not just in Washington, D.C. And the federal government certainly hires traditional technical writers, but they also hire grant writers, proposal writers. They're looking at people who create manuals, who develop documentation. And sometimes these people fall into different departments. Sometimes that, it happens in HR. Sometimes, I mean, think about it. The U.S. Smithsonian's fall under the federal government. They're, government funded and, run museums. And so if you work for the museum, technically you work for the government. And so there's just such a variety of roles. Now, I will say one of the great benefits of working for the government, generally speaking, is that the work is very steady. People are often really eager to get into a government position because it tends to be very secure. It is important for me to note that there could be some changes to the way our government, these positions are structured, and then a number of opportunities depending on the outcome of the upcoming election. And so I think it's important just to know that, generally speaking, we have a pretty large government with a lot of parts, and they're often hiring people to fill in different roles. And what's great about steady work is you go to work, you come home. The government has a lot of money to use, but usually it can only be used in certain ways. There's very specific ways that governments can spend money. They're not allowed to just say, oh, you know what would be wonderful? Let's put beautiful velvet chairs in our office. They have pots of money that are designated for things. So, for example, perhaps you work for the government and you're on a communications transition team. The government is transitioning, say, to using the Microsoft Outlook suite and all of its attendant technologies, including Teams, et cetera. So you're on the communications team and you are notifying people, you're helping with the transition, you're working on the technology, you're setting up teams. So that's a lot of different things to do. I will say one challenge to government work is that it can be kind of hierarchical and sort of depend on mostly the time that you spend in the position rather than your eagerness to be promoted. And when I say that there's both broad and specific types of work, sometimes you don't have a great deal of control over the types of work that you are doing. You work for this department, there's this new initiative, you have to work on it. Because that's what the government needs. And 10 years ago, they set aside funding for this project, and now it is 2025 and they are ready to go. So for some people coming right out of school, this can feel a little bit less exciting, perhaps. Excuse me. Now, however, there are other benefits to working for the government that could outweigh this. I don't know if you're familiar with the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, but if you have public loans, meaning federal loans, not private ones through private companies, but through the federal government that you took for any level of your education, over the course of 10 years, you're able to be forgiven for those loans if you work for a government position. This is also true in the case of education and some nonprofits as well. So for people who have loans, this could be a really big deal. Certainly, it's not for everyone, and especially for roles that require security clearance. Security clearance generally is most easily achieved by US citizens. It is not impossible for non-citizens to get it, I believe, but this could be a months-long process. So if you're interested in working for the government, this is something that you want to think about right now. Relatedly, working for public education. This is part of the government. And so public educators also receive public service loan forgiveness if they apply and go through the process. I believe what you have to do is your loans get consolidated and refinanced, and you must make 120 payments over 10 years. And then the balance of the loans is forgiven. So if you took quite a lot of loans to go to college, working in a government or an educational setting could be really a great option for you because these loans are quite expensive. Now, if you work for industry, you're going to likely earn more money. So you could pay those loans back faster. So I want you to think of these as sort of lifestyle decisions. You're going to choose to work in public education or for the government because part of the benefit to doing that is getting those loans forgiven. What's really wonderful is that you could work in several capacities in education. There's all sorts of data positions, there's certainly teaching positions. And I want to encourage you to think about this because what's really wonderful is that from day one, you receive healthcare benefits if you work as a public educator, I believe in any state, but certainly in the state of Florida. And so if you are graduating, you're thinking, I'm not quite sure what I want to do, there's a huge need for teachers at all levels. Now, I am not saying it will be an easy road. Several people in my life teach K through 12. It is very challenging. Sometimes they have 25 to 35 students in their classes. It's very busy, but it could be a really collegial and congenial environment. And certainly you'll still get summer break, generally speaking. So that could be a really big benefit for students transitioning from a 4-year degree program into their next step. Now, if you go to work for a nonprofit, this can be great. Excuse me, this can be great if you have a cause that's really important to you. So I have a friend from college who works for a gun violence nonprofit in Washington, D.C. And this cause was really important to her because she knew people who had been victims of gun violence. And so by doing that, she took her women's studies degree and forayed it into that area. And so the challenge when you work for a nonprofit is often you might be the only person doing communication, technical and otherwise. And so your role could be very capacious, since really nonprofits often have limited budgets. And so what can happen is they'll hire a communications person, maybe there's two, and you'll be doing social media, you'll be doing communications, you'll be doing marketing, you'll be doing technical communication, writing manuals for an internal documentation. So this could be very exciting for those of you who like to do different kinds of writing and communication and even graphic design. This could be really wonderful. However, there are challenges. Sometimes nonprofits depend on grant money, meaning money that is not secure every year. They have to win the money over and over again. Sometimes this is called soft money. And so that can be challenging because your employment may not be as secure because your nonprofit may be waiting on the next grant to see if they can continue to fund you. However, sometimes our students really love working for nonprofits because of that. They don't want to feel like they have to commit forever. And so if they spend 1 or 2 or 3 years someplace and then they go someplace else, that could be a really big success. It's possible sometimes, excuse me, that nonprofits, as well as government jobs and any job in education, will offer tuition remission for graduate programs. Sometimes it is reimbursable, meaning you have to pay for it and then they give you money back afterwards. And sometimes they pay for it outright if the graduate degree relates to your job. So if you're thinking about moving on in higher education, but you don't want to take more loans, this could be a wonderful option. Now, not all nonprofits offer this, so this is an important thing to ask about during your interview, but more importantly, especially when you're negotiating for your job. And we can't forget working in industry. There are so many different types of companies that have different products. We have students who have, worked in all different areas, medical writing and proposal writing, app development, user experience. And so in these jobs, you might actually be called a technical writer, and you'll likely be on a team of fellow technical writers. So some people love this. They want to be on the technical writing and design team. There's a lot of camaraderie. There's, fellow experts. And there's often many opportunities for promotion and sort of increasing your salary. There's hiring bonuses, there's retention bonuses, there are raises, because industry is in a different market than government and education and nonprofit, totally different. So those organizations don't normally offer regular raises and bonuses and that sort of thing that are performance based, but those are available to those of you who go into industry. A lot of times the work is more fast paced because we live in a capitalist society. And so different companies are competing for different types of jobs and they're trying to put out the best product the fastest. And so some of our students love that. They love the energy, they love the atmosphere, they love the free snacks. It just kind of depends on, what your take is, what your interest is. Certainly, I can tell you from working at two universities, if you want to get a pizza and have the university pay for it, it's very, very difficult. At some industry jobs, they have pizza every Friday. So this is, certainly, it's just a totally different environment in that sense. It's really wonderful because there are sometimes changes too that are really positive. Sometimes there's sort of new leadership that rolls in and that can be helpful, but that also could be detrimental. And certainly sometimes our futures at these companies are not as secure. Many of you, I'm sure, have been reading about the layoffs in the tech industry. Huge companies have been laying off hundreds of thousands of tech workers, and technical communicators are not immune to that. And so it's important that we think about sort of how to continue to reach even when we land in a wonderful position, because occasionally things happen. And there's certainly these other slash hybrid positions. I was hesitant to call this section a hybrid because that usually makes people think of a certain type of remote work in which you work at home part of the time and you come to the office part of the time. But government contractors, educational nonprofits, and freelance work really have aspects of all of the different sectors of work that I've described so far. And they're very popular for our students. So if you know someone who's gone to work for L3Harris, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, these really large companies, they're called government contractors, which basically means that their main job is they create and sell products to the US government. And this works because the US government, there must be a competition for the US government to purchase a product. They can't just decide, well, we like this company, we're just going to buy this product, to ensure that things are fair. So these companies often produce the same types of equipment. They're in defense or in space, that kind of thing. And they sell specifically to the government. So these companies may have some similar challenges to other government employees because you may be required to get security clearance. However, they have different benefits, and sometimes they only offer contracts, which are shorter term, specifically termed terms of employment. So you might be on a contract from January to June 2025 with the option of an extension. And so some people, excuse me, again, some people really like this because they don't want to feel deeply committed to one job right after graduation. They want to experiment. They're interested in trying out different things. And so signing up for a full-time position in government or in industry feels unappealing to them. Other times, people really need the benefits and other things that come with being in those types of positions. I will note that sometimes these positions are more face-to-face. So as you're conducting your job search, I think it's important to address that and think about your preference for that as well. Excuse me. So now that we've talked about all of these different sectors, I'd like you to start to think about what your Goldilocks plan is. So what might your ideal job look like? What types of writing and communication would it involve? Would it involve design work, user experience, user testing? Would it be mostly solo? Would you work in teams? Would you be the only technical communicator on the team, or would you prefer to be among fellow technical communication friends? Um, is it exciting to be in a fast-paced work environment in which you're doing many different types of labor, whether it's sort of for big projects and following them for a long time, or would you rather be on a contract and do something just for a designated amount of time before moving on to the next thing? And sort of what challenges, would you face in pursuing your Goldilocks plan? If you're not a US citizen, it might be more difficult for you to get a government contracting job. If you're not willing to go to work face to face, it might be difficult for you to get some of these positions. Sometimes nonprofits simply don't pay enough, and simply just, so it's not feasible to work at them because you need to put food on your table, pay your rent, and provide for yourself. So sometimes the sort of pieces just don't add up. But I think brainstorming what the ideal job looks like for you will help you as you search. So you're kind of backwards designing things. Of course, we can't just say, oh, well, I want this perfect job to appear for me. But by imagining your Goldilocks plan, this is going to give you a sense of sort of some features that you're going to be looking for. All positions that are open are trying to hire someone. Things don't work when people can't hire the employees that they need. So these people are ultimately recruiting you. And so I want you to think about what benefits and detriments would be involved if you accepted a certain position, worked for a certain type of company, or were part of a certain sector. And I really want to encourage you to think about how this isn't necessarily a permanent plan. I think it's really challenging for people to sort of envision 3 and 5 years. Excuse me. We all lived through COVID-19. We were lucky enough to live through COVID-19. So it can make planning for the future feel very overwhelming. So I encourage you to think about your 1 or 2 year plan post graduation. At UCF, we're fortunate to have many adult students, people who consider themselves to be non traditional students, whether they're active duty military, whether they're parents, grandparents, they have many responsibilities. And so I encourage you, because you've spent so much money and time pursuing this degree, to really consider how to make it work for you. And it's my job as your faculty member to assist in any way that I can. And I encourage you to reach out to me or any of our other faculty at any time, because people are really excited to engage with students, and our goal is to help and support you. Excuse me, support you as much as possible. So here's some resources for additional consideration. Just some things to kind of help you think about, where you might be going, what's of great interest to you. I've included the state of Florida tuition waiver information, even though not all of you would necessarily want to go on to work for the state of Florida. This is just an example of the state benefit, one of the state benefits, which is tuition remission. So I believe it involves 9 credits. You know what? Don't quote me. It's either 6 or 9 credits a semester, or a certain amount of money per year towards your education. I should say that there are some restrictions. You are like the last person to register for classes. So this can make things a little bit difficult, but it certainly is a benefit that's worth considering. So overall, that's all that I have for you. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk with you, to work together and think through the things that you like so much about technical communication. And I'll be very pleased to take your questions and assist however I can.